Hi, hey everyone. Welcome to another Escapees virtual campfire. I'm really excited to have you all here tonight. Today we are going to talk with Shawn Loring and Susie Adams about Domicile. They're two attorneys. Shawn's the CEO of Escapees also, but they're two attorneys who've been working in Domicile for quite a long time and have a lot of really useful information to share. I know this is a really hot topic for RVers, so really excited to see you all here tonight. Some quick housekeeping before we get started with the Domicile chat. I wanted to remind all of y'all, some of you may have already seen the information in the club news email that went out yesterday, or our club newsletter, but we are really excited to share that we actually have an event coming up this winter. We have taken the time and tried our best to plan something that would be socially distant, but also allow us to get together and socialize a bit. And so what we're working on, it is, give me 2 seconds. And so you might be wondering what this mysterious event is. We've thoroughly enjoyed our virtual events like this one and several others that we've done the last few months, but we are still eager to safely reconnect with our members face to face. And so with this in mind, our event directors have been putting their creativity to work and organized a socially distanced in-person gathering for this winter. In fact, they've actually put together 6 of them. Starting in November and running through February, we're hosting the winter home-based gatherings in California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, giving you lots of options. In keeping with our safer in place guidance, attendees are going to be required to book a minimum of 1 month at the designated parks, in addition to registering with Escapees and following all the CDC and Escapees guidelines during the event. Spots are going to be limited, so we can adhere to the CDC guidelines and local guidelines for social activities. So start thinking now about whether you'd like to attend one of these gatherings. We're going to have more details about these coming out soon, including which parks are participating, as well as estimated cost. All of that will be released when registration opens on August 20th at 10 a.m. That's next Thursday at 10 a.m. And we'll have the information up on both the escapees.com website as well as the escapers.com website. And in addition to that, we'll have more information coming out in next week's newsletter, and we'll likely have information up on social media. So we have lots of opportunities to learn more about what's going on with that. But don't forget about it. Set a reminder if you need to, whatever works for you, to go ahead and check things out at 10 a.m. next week. So now on to the fun part of tonight. We are here, like I said before, talking with Shawn Loring and Susie Adams about Domicile. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you better than I could do it. So give me just a moment and we'll get Shawn on and we'll let him introduce himself.
Hi gang, I'm Shawn Loring, and thank you, Georgianne, by the way, our communications director, and am essentially my co-host here. So from time to time, Georgianne may chime back in and help me field some questions and whatnot, and just be her wonderful self. So round of applause for Georgianne. Thank you for being here. As Georgianne noted, I am the CEO and the attorney for the Escapees RV Club, and I keep a hand in a law firm. I'm going to introduce my law partner, Susie Adams, here in just a moment. But tonight's discussion about Domicile was born out of a virtual campfire that we did a couple weeks ago on advocacy, and we started to get a lot of Domicile related questions coming out of those advocacy topics. So we decided, what better way to address all of those questions and spin off its own virtual campfire. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Susie Adams, who is my dear friend and law partner, and an expert in all things Domicile. So Susie, welcome.
Thank you, Shawn, and thank you, Georgianne. Hello, everyone. I always have a little trouble when I can't see you. So if you're getting bored, I can't, change the topic or something. So hopefully this will be an interesting topic. When I first met Shawn, we were both here in Livingston, Texas, and we were together as friends at Rotary Club. And he mentioned that he worked for something called Escapees, which I must actually say, even though we'd had a house here in Livingston for 30 years, I'd never heard of Escapees. and was a little concerned about
Well,
what it
you're
might
probably
mean.
also concerned by the fact that we have a state prison like a half an hour down the road. So when you, hey, we're with the escapees, or really?
Which was part of the problem. And I didn't really know where Shawn was coming from. But then my husband and we drove to California, and we took our casita trailer, pulled it, towed it behind us. And in a gas station somewhere in Los Angeles, a man came running up to me. I was actually pumping the gas. And he said, "Where are you from? Are you from Texas?" And I thought, well, yeah, of course we're from Texas. We have Texas license plates and everything. And then he said, "But where in Texas?" And I said, "Livingston." And he said, "Oh, the international headquarters of escapees." And that was the moment when I told my husband, "Get in the car. There's somebody really weird."
Get in the car. We must drive away from yes. It's clearly dangerous, unstable person. Yeah.
So then we come back, and Shawn and I are talking one day, and he talks about me joining his law firm, and he said, "Our specialty is domicile." And I know domicile from law school. It's like a 30-minute subject. It's easy. What's the big deal? How can you possibly have a problem? And then we started working together over 4 years ago. And since then, as I told Shawn before this conference, we'll call it, this webinar, I said, I think you can now throw any question at me about domicile, and I'll be able to handle it, because that's what I've been doing almost full time for the last 4+ years. And it's a super interesting subject when you're talking about RVers. So Shawn, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, let's jump right into it. First domicile question, because you said you can handle anything. How do you make a really good tuna casserole? No, I'm kidding. I think probably the best place to start when talking about domicile is maybe a definition. Is there a working definition of what is a domicile?
Glad you asked that, Shawn. And that's part of the problem. The definition of domicile is not in a statute. It's in case law. And that means every case that comes along having to deal with this subject affects the definition. It's basically where you intend to call home. Now, that's easy when you live in a house and that's where you come to every night and that's where you live. Piece of cake. But when
so it's almost automatic at that point.
Yeah, no problem. But when you live in an RV and you're taking your house with you, it becomes a very complicated question.
Okay. Well, all right. So follow-up question. Why do you need one?
Why do you need a domicile? We have many people. And again, part of what I do every day is answer calls from folks who say, "Help me figure out my domicile. Tell me what it's about, what's going on here." And they usually say, "But the reason I got an RV is so I don't have to call anywhere home. I want to be free." And there's a point to which you can be free, but there's a point to which you've actually got to have a home somewhere for very important reasons. And our government, just like pretty much any government, says, we need to know where you call home.
Okay. All right. So in a sense, everyone has one, whether you like it or not.
Everyone has one. In fact,
Okay.
Right now, any of you guys just look at your driver's license. That's assumed to be where you call home. So whatever address you've got on that driver's license, they assume that's where you live.
Okay, but that's an assumption, which says to me as an attorney, I can rebut that assumption, or there might be factors involved in this. So how do I go about establishing a domicile? Are there steps or elements, or how does that work?
That's a good question, Shawn. It starts with your first thing. You have to, you look at your driver's license. It says, this is where I call home. If in fact, this is now no longer a good address for you because you sold that house 6 months ago and you're just holding on to it because you don't know what to do now, that's the moment where you start saying, holy cow, where do I call home when I live in an RV and I'm traveling all over, but you need the home. You need the home. Why do you need it? Number one, again, driver's license. It needs to reflect where you're calling home. Number two, it affects your vehicle registration. Wherever you choose to call home, that's where you have to actually register your vehicles. That's where you get them insured. That's where you get your health insurance. And that's a big deal, because I'll have many a person call me and say, well, we just sold our home, let's say in California, we want to move to Texas. And then I'll say, okay, well, let me tell you right off that that's going to affect your health insurance. You'll no longer have California health insurance. I have many a person who basically hangs up at that point because they have a really great, let's say, Kaiser or some health insurance that they realize they don't want to give up. Health insurance is affected by where you call home. And vehicle insurance, health insurance, also very important right now as we're heading toward the November elections. Where you call home is where you vote. I had a man today calling and saying, you know, I want to, I'm selling my house, but I want to make sure I can vote in November. Well, you need to have an address in order to vote. And again, that address, usually I think most states have it connected to where your driver's license is. So if you get a driver's license in Florida, you can't vote back in Georgia where you came from. You gotta, that goes with you.
Yes, and just an aside on voting, so as the attorney for the group, and I do a lot of advocacy, as I mentioned at the beginning of our time tonight, we put together a political guide to help the folks in our mail forwarding services be better citizens, have an understanding of the candidates in their community. So I just wanted to give a shameless plug, absolutely just embarrassingly shameless plug for my own works there. Yeah.
But it's also,
but look out for that.
Yeah, it's also important because where you call home, this place you call domicile, you have the right to vote all the way down to the county level. So actually educating yourself about who's running in every single, part of the election is very important for your community as well as yourself. So know that that's a huge right that goes with you to the place you domicile.
In my mind, domicile is, to your point, you're making a connection not only, you're domiciling not only in a state, but in a county, and you're making a more narrow election. Take Texas, for example. It takes, a day or two to drive across Texas? I mean, that's it's the second largest state in America. I mean, that's a lot of terra firma. There's a big difference between East Texas and West Texas, and so.
That's right. And so on
would you agree with that?
Well, in the state level, then you need to educate yourself on who's running for, let's say right now, the senator for the state of Texas. There's a contest going. And then, but on the county level, find out what's happening in the county you call home. So if it's escapees, that's Polk County, Livingston, where I live. And that affects, who your county judge is. And your county judge affects such things as how you probate a will. If you choose to call Livingston, Texas your home, or any other county in the United States, that's where your will be probated when you die. And I have many a person calling me, oh, my dad died. He was living in Arizona. We can't figure out where we should probate his will, but his driver's license said Livingston, Texas. So I guess what, guys? That's where his will be probated, right here in Livingston, Texas. And it affects, again, I mean, in terms of how your property's passed on, that is affected by where you call home. So before you choose a domicile, you need to look at such things as, is this the place I want to call home if I were, God forbid, to die tomorrow? Is this where I would like my will probated, for example?
Yes. And I may have taken you a little bit off track. You had mentioned that driver licenses, vehicle registration, voter registration are affected by domicile. Are there other things or factors, elements of a person's life that are commonly affected by domicile? Are there things that our viewers should know about?
Yes, I mean, another big one is insurance, vehicle insurance, and even sales tax. You know, how much are you going to pay in sales tax for registering your vehicles in a certain state, in a certain county? Our particular county, Livingston, apparently has a rather higher than expected vehicle insurance. And when you ask our local insurance agents what's the reason, it's basically because of texting and driving. That's what they're claiming. It's also because Livingston's it's quite rural, and it's grown up over time. So you've got very dangerous roads here where you've got grandma coming out of her driveway, pulling onto a road where log trucks are going 75 miles an hour. So it's just, for some, this is, so all those issues are part of what you need to look at when you're choosing where you want to call home. But of course, one of the more important parts of this is where will you come back to on a regular basis?
Yeah.
Because in order to show people, I really call, let's say, Livingston, Texas, my home, but I live in my RV full time, you need to show this is the place where you've got your lawyers, your accountants, your doctors. It doesn't have to be right here in Livingston, but it has to be pretty close. So,
yeah. No. Finish.
No,
I
go
didn't
ahead.
want to talk over you. And that's why I was making the point about look at the size of Texas. There is a big, it's disparate. If you're in East Texas, that is a whole world away from West Texas. So that ambit, that circle that you're drawing by connecting to Polk County, yeah, maybe you can have a financial planner down in Montgomery County or in Liberty County, our neighboring counties, and that's no big deal. But if all of a sudden they're in Midland, Texas, and you're in, Polk County, it's a little bit more of a stretch.
But it's still Texas, so that's okay. But the ones that worry me are the ones who say, I get calls from California in particular, where I'll get called and somebody will say, I want to make Texas my new home. And I'll say, okay, what connections do you have to Texas? And there'll be a long sigh. And then I'll say, what connections do you still have to California? Well, I've got a condo there, a boat there. It's like, no, you can't.
My sister lives there. I see her every 3 months. Yeah, right.
Yeah, you can't choose a state. In fact, some people call and say, well, we're going to choose South Dakota. Why is that? Because we don't have to go back for 5 years in order to register our vehicles. And I'm like, well, then that means you can't prove you live there. I mean, if you're not going to come back for 5 years, that just really kills your domicile.
So in other words, it should, wherever you pick as your state and county of domicile, it should be part of your normal story arc, part of your normal travels, that maybe every once in a while you're scooting through that area.
That's what I say. It should be an anchor. And join local things. If you've got we always suggest that you definitely maybe subscribe to the local newspaper, join the local library, but also if you've got like a Rotary Club membership somewhere else, move it to this new hometown. There are cases. There's one case, several cases out of Minnesota, where in one particular case, the man proved he had a house in Minnesota and a house in Florida. And Minnesota said, we believe you're still domiciled here. He said, no, I've moved to Florida. What's your proof? And he showed that he had quit his tennis club in Minnesota, joined a tennis club in Florida. The court said, you can't play tennis remotely. You must have really changed your domicile to Florida. So he won the case based on changing his tennis membership.
So I mean, what that says to me is that there's a lot of factors that go into this, and it's something that you don't just set up and then forget about. It's something that you're maintaining. You're getting fishing licenses and tennis club memberships and library cards, in addition to doctors and accountants and financial planners and whoever you're dealing with. I mean, is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, in fact, you're being compared to the couple or the person who sells their house in the state you're coming from and moves to your new state and buys a house. Okay, so you're being compared to that person. and you're in an RV going all over the place. So you're going to have to show more of those things to show, no, we really left the state we're coming from. And we really actually became part of the state we're moving to. And so again, every club you join, every church, lots of people join local churches. It doesn't mean you have to go very often to church in that location, but just show we've got an anchor in this new place we're calling home.
We have a very active chat conversation going on with a lot of different questions, and I want to make sure that we save time to really dig into some of those. But somebody had asked, what does probating your will mean? And I know you had brought up, essentially getting your estate plan in order as part of this. Can you give 30 seconds on what probate is? I know we could do hours on that alone, but.
Yeah, and again, do ask those questions, because we're in this business full time and we forget that for most folks, it's like, what are you talking about? So feel free to ask those questions. Probating means when you die, and if you have a will, the place where you're considered living at the time of your death will look at your will to determine where your things go. Basically, how do you pass on what you own, your assets, to other people? And that's based on where you call home.
Yeah. I hope that helped, Alyssa. We can do more on this later. By the way, I'll mention this from time to time. We have an hour allotted for this time. Susie is very passionate about this topic, as am I. We could talk for hours and hours. We're going to have a lot of questions in this chat discussion that we just simply can't get to. I do want to note for the community that Susie, graciously donates her time to Escapees members for free domicile consultations. So if for whatever reason we don't get to answer your question, or you don't get a full personal answer to something that's on your mind, please know that you can contact Loring and Associates. We'll put the number up, periodically throughout the lecture today. Here it is. There's the phone number, and you can just call and make an appointment. Okay, so if for whatever reason we don't get to you, just know that there's another mechanism to get good information. At the end of the day, we want to see people help.
Yeah, and like Shawn said, it is free. And it's really not time limited. I mean, I get vicarious pleasure out of people calling and telling me they're somewhere maybe cooler and in the mountains while we're here in Livingston, Texas. And then they tell me what they need. And so I enjoy those conversations. So feel free to call. And
you're much better than I am. When the people start, I call them braggarts and I hang up on them. I just, if I'm sweltering in 105 degree Texas heat, you all should too. All kidding aside, I do have one other question that will seat us in the moment, orient us to what's happening worldwide right now as it affects Domicile. So I'm going to ask you just to speculate here. Just use that vast reservoir of experience to bear on this. How do you think, or how might the pandemic affect Domicile?
Yeah, thank you, Shawn, for asking that question, because it comes out all the time in these calls. I'll have folks who say, look, we were planning to come to Texas, become Texans, register our vehicles. We found out, number one, we can't leave the state we're in right now, or we found out that in Livingston, Texas, the registrar's office is closed, or the driver's license office is a month back. And I've kind of looked at this from all legal angles, because I think what Shawn and I really share more than anything is we're legal geeks. We love legal issues that we don't know.
That's true. Our glasses are functional.
And so basically, I would say anything right now that you feel like you were unable to do because of the pandemic, you should absolutely argue that the pandemic is the reason you could not do whatever it was. And I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone to counter that, given the fact that we haven't had this kind of event in 100 years. 100 years ago, we didn't have the same registration needs, the same RVers out in the world. We didn't have any of these things. So absolutely say my number one reason I couldn't do whatever is because of the pandemic. And I think one question that came up ahead of time was someone who said, look, I don't want to be domiciled in, let's say, New Mexico. We were here for a few months and the pandemic hit, and we've been here longer than this. Now, there are statutes that say in certain states, if you stay more than 180 days, we consider you statutorily domiciled here, even if you've got another state as your domicile. I would fight that right now. I would say, if anyone says to you, you owe taxes, income taxes, because you were here over 180 days, I would argue back that, well, I didn't want to be. And I'm from New Mexico. I was born there, so it's not a dig on New Mexico, but really argue, number one, that but for this pandemic, I would not have been stuck where I've been stuck. And I do not think I really fit the definition of domicile because I did not intend to stay here. The pandemic forced me to stay in a place I didn't want to be. And it also comes up with force majeure, the whole idea of which some folks have asked me about, well, we had a contract to do this or that we can't do because of the pandemic. The other side may say, well, too bad, you have to pay anyway. Again, I would argue, no, you don't, because of this out of our control event, which is what force majeure is, and that we could not handle it. I mean, we don't have the power to overcome a virus that is making us do things that we did not choose to do. So, I mean, I have to admit, I was a trial lawyer for 20 years. So everything I hear is, oh, let's end up in court. Let's see where it goes. But I really do think you should, definitely think about, do I need to accept this? I mean, especially if you get a letter that says you should pay state taxes. I think you should, number one, write back and say, nope, this is not my home. I don't belong here. I just came here for a month and the virus hit and I had to stay. But for these reasons, this other state is my home. And then you start saying, I've got my driver's license in the other state. I've got my vehicles registered there. I've got my health insurance, my vehicle insurance. That's where I've got my tennis court, where I would play if it weren't for whatever it is. Right. You argue that the domicile that you're claiming continues to be yours, even though there's this pandemic.
Yes, and by the way, for those of our viewers who are now thumbing furiously through Black's Law Dictionary, trying to figure out what force majeure is, it means act of God or a force of nature.
Right, now, Shawn, those kind of questions, I need you all to not know the answer to, so you'll call me up so we can have these.
What was that term? It seemed really important. It sounded like Latin. Oh my God. All right, I know that we had some questions that were submitted ahead of time. We've got a lot of questions that are going on in the chat room. We've had a lot of questions in really both scenarios about voting, and obviously this is something that's very timely. We've got this great population of nomadic families that are trying to vote absentee. Can you give some guidance on how to do that, or how it impacts domicile?
Well, I'll start by saying, remember, every state has a deadline by which you need to claim that you live there in order to get to vote. So like the man I was talking to this morning, if he wants to still vote in the state where he is, even though his house may close before that, I said, well, then stay there. Make sure, don't change anything till after the election, because you only get to vote in one place. And you don't want to be caught in that 30-day window where you've left state number one, didn't get to state number two in time, and all of a sudden you can't vote. So make sure that you know the actual voting rules of the state that you want to vote in. And part of that, I know, and I'm not that good at the sites, but I know that we have connections where you can look at, through escapees, you can look at how early you can vote and how you can vote in, say, Texas, Florida, or South Dakota. And I know in Texas in particular, I've got to admit, I have trouble figuring out how you vote absentee. I mean, for me, it's a little confusing. My husband did it for several years. I just thought, no, I'm just going to show up at the polls because I can't figure it out. But it's you do have to go through a process. Yes. And our local county, which is she? She's county, not judge and not county. County clerk.
Polk County, it's county clerk. In South Dakota, in Sumter County, it's an election supervisor. So it gets very state and county.
And all I know is that Shalana Hawk is Shalana is our person, and her she's very happy to answer your question. So in terms of if you don't know how to vote, and you will not be in Livingston at the time of the election, then she can help you through the process. But you've got to, it's a process. So you need to understand the steps of it, which brings up another point. Where you are domiciled is also where you're called for jury duty. And again, in Livingston, Texas, if you claim Livingston for your home, if you're summoned for jury duty, you can call the court and say, hey, I can't get there because I'm in, let's say, Alaska. And our county clerk will say, oh, are you an escapee? And then when you say yes, she'll say, okay, I'll take you off the jury. Basically, you're going to be not being called for jury duty until the next time you come to our county. Let us know and we'll put you on a jury, which is wonderful. I've heard that Florida, you can miss once. If you're summoned the second time, you have to show up. You can't say, well, I'm gone again. So one of those things, I don't know about South Dakota, if they're that strict, but be sure and look at that. If you want to claim one of these states as your new home, be sure and check on such things as jury duty, because they're laxed here, but not necessarily everywhere else.
I will. I'll add a little bit to that, and thank you for that answer. And yes, jury duty is part and parcel to this whole process, and it helps again strengthen your domicile. One of the things that I've found in the research that I've done in preparing the political guides that Escapee sends out is that when you step back and you think about the concept of absentee voting, here's what's happening. You are saying that I am not in the county and cannot walk into the poll on election day or in the early voting time period. And so the county says, super, give us an address outside of the county and we'll happily mail a ballot to you. So internally, as part of our mail forwarding service, we've gone through some machinations about helping people have an address outside of the county that they can, have that ballot sent to and then have that collected and put back into their mail forwarding service to then have sent forward to you. But to Susie, to your point, there's a process there. And that all takes time, so if you're running this right up to the wire, it could come down that your ballot doesn't get received in time. Doesn't get received in time and doesn't get counted. So anyway, I did notice a couple of questions about that in the chat. Hopefully that addressed that. We do have a number of questions surrounding people. I'm going to try to consolidate this in the interest of time. You'll have a scenario where somebody has a sticks and bricks house in one state, and here they are, right? They're manifesting the great dream of full timing. So they're in process of selling the sticks and bricks house in one state and trying to connect their domicile to another state so that they can hit the dusty trails. Can you help the viewers understand that process? Some specific questions are there time limits involved in this? When should I start that process? What if my house doesn't sell by the time I've switched my domicile? So,
yes, and again, you're being compared to the couple, the person that sells your house in one place and moves to a new place. Now that happens a lot, where you still have the house in the old place that hasn't sold, but you got a job in the new place, so you're going to have to go ahead and move. You can change your domicile to the new location, even though you still have a house in the old location that you're trying to sell. it gets a little stickier when you're not really going to sell that house in the old location. Maybe you'll rent it out. And then I ask the follow-up question, who are you going to rent to? And if you say, well, my kids that aren't going to pay rent, they're just going to live there. And then it's like, well, that doesn't sound like you're selling or renting. It sounds like you're keeping that house and trying not to say that's your domicile. So that's tricky. Yeah. That's a problem. On the other hand, if you're, and this is the super problem that I've had several people tell me about. One man said he put his house on the market in Maryland and they were going to go ahead and become Texans. The house sold quicker than they thought it would. At closing, the realtor said, let me see your driver's license. And she said, oh, you're still here in Maryland. And they said, yeah. He said, had they moved to Texas before the house sold, they would have owed an extra $45,000 in foreign ownership of property taxes.
Wow.
So that, and about half the states have that. And it's not what you think. You know, you think foreign, you think somebody overseas owns a house and they're being sort of had hit with extra tax. No, it means out of state. And I found half the states have that. So before you make this move, make sure that you can actually keep that house on the market, move to the new state, and don't face property tax. I think it's property tax, foreign. I mean, I'm not a tax attorney, but it's enough to say, whoa, make sure you aren't going to owe extra money because you're no longer in the state where you own the house that you're selling. So that's number one. The next part of that, though, is in terms of timing, is just when is your story? And that's what this is. It's a story. It's where you're saying, I intend to call this new place my home. Where does that story make sense? If I had one couple call who said, well, we're really not going to do any of this for 3 more years, but could we go ahead and become South Dakotans even though we're still living in Arizona? And I said, no, you can't pretend a place is your home when you're living somewhere else full time for the next 3 years. You've got to have it after you're making the move, whatever part of that move is that makes this new place your home. So let's say you've got a house on the market back where you're coming from. There isn't any problem with foreign taxes. You want to go ahead and move to your new state, set up your domicile, make sure that house is really on the market. Make sure you're not just holding it for your kids or somebody else. So it looks like it's on the market, but it's not. And then you can go ahead and change your domicile sooner, but only if you've got true proof that you intend to leave that state behind.
Okay. God, and help me out here. There was a case out of Minnesota involving a couple that went to South Dakota.
Well,
was that the Sanchez case?
That case, and it was Sanchez, and I'd love to meet the Sanchezes, because what they did was, which I always ask, if there's anyone here who's a Sanchez, let me know what happened, because what they did was they sold their house in Minnesota, they got in an RV, they went to South Dakota, they changed their driver's license, registered their vehicles, got their insurance, and hit the road. And then from there, they traveled all over. Minnesota, which is a pretty aggressive state, they don't believe you when you think you're really leaving. So they got a letter that said, we don't believe you really left Minnesota and became South Dakotans. And they tried to fight it. They ended up in court. The court determined that they were still Minnesotans, because even though they sold their house in Minnesota and had no connection there, they didn't have any connection to South Dakota either, because they hadn't set foot in the state except for the week they spent changing their driver's license, registration, etc. So that's the case that says you better put your foot down in your new state. Don't go there for a week and then leave and pretend everything's okay. You need to really have connections. And I got to say, South Dakota, for me, when people say we're going to make it our home, I'm always like, tell me why. My flags go up, because I haven't heard that many people say this is my dream place to call home. My favorite case was a woman who said her great-great-great-great-grandfather, she thought, had fought at Wounded Knee, maybe, or some connection. That's like, okay, I could see how that could be, a place you'd want to go back to on a regular basis. And I had one woman tell me her own daughter who lived in South Dakota said, "Mom, don't call this state your home." Not to belittle South Dakota.
Right. I mean, different strokes for different folks, right? I mean, but no, I appreciate you delving into the Sanchez case, because I think it really illustrates a point that you're making, that it's all about telling the best story you can. And the comment that I made previously about this has to be part of your story arc. You need to be coming back to this area and interacting with this community. From what I recall, and you correct me if I'm wrong because you're the expert here, but it's not that you have to spend a set amount of time in any one state. It's the quality of the interactions with that state or county over time that builds up that story. So you take the Sanchez's, who were there for 3 days and never came back. If I recall correctly, from that case also, didn't they spend like 51%? They spent some inordinate amount of time in Texas. And they had like hunting and fishing licenses in Texas, if I recall correctly.
Oh,
anyway,
wow.
it's neither here nor there, but the point of this being, all part of a continuum, a story that you are developing and maintaining, I think reflects well in that case.
Yeah, and part of it is the idea that, where are you going to spend time? Where really are, and some folks, I mean, there's states like Oregon that I'll have people who go, you know what, I think I'm going to call Oregon home. And you can do it anywhere. It's not just the South Dakota, Florida, or Texas. It's a place where you see yourself going back to on a regular basis, and where you can get an address that you can use for such things as driver's license and registration. I mean, those are important, but make sure, don't just choose a state, especially South Dakota, because you don't have to go back for 5 years. That undermines the whole argument of that being called your home. So and let's see here.
We have a question on the screen. What if you want to change your domicile state while you are full-time RVing, but you have a storage unit with a couple of, I'm guessing, collector cars, etc. So essentially,
in the state in which they began
possession.
from. That's what they're asking.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's the state in which they began from. There's where their collector cars and their personal items are in the state where they launched from, but it's no longer where they want to domicile.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I've had it already, and have had to talk through it. It depends on what those collector cars are. They going to stay just inside some kind of storage unit, or are they actually going to be used? I mean, as part of what you get into, if you're actually going to drive them, and I mean, again, I don't know with collector cars what the purpose is, but the storage unit itself that is in the state you're saying you're no longer calling home is one of those elements that the court will look at and say, well, if you're not calling it home, how come you got a storage unit back here? And how come it's got cars in it that, you don't want to move? I mean, so look at that. And we've had several articles we've written about the 10 commandments of domicile, which are really the things the courts look at to determine if you can call this new state your home. And I think that Georgianne will give those sites, but you might look at those. I'll brag a bit that I've had several people who have gotten tax letters in the state of California, which is a tough state to prove you don't live in any longer. And they've answered the letters from the taxing authorities in California by following our 10 commandments of domicile and saying, no, we do not live here. We live, let's say, in Texas. That's where we have our driver's license. That's where we have our vehicles registered. That's where we have our insurance, et cetera. And they've won those cases. They've just at that level, based on the letters, based on our 10 commandments. So, there is something to what we're saying. It can help you, but make sure you've done the steps. Don't say, well, yeah, we did the first 5 steps. We got the driver's license, the registration, et cetera. But we always want to go back to our favorite doctor in California and our favorite accountant and our lawyers there. And we have a condo there and we have our storage unit. Well, then you're like, no, you're going to lose.
So I know we have another question on the screen, but I want to ask a follow-up question about these factors that we're talking about. And like the previous question where they had collector cars in storage in the state of former domicile. Is there any one factor, if you get it wrong, it's going to destroy your domicile, or do courts, are courts looking more at a balancing of, well, we're going to give X amount of weight here and a little bit more weight? So is there some gotcha factor? If you screw this up, you've lost your domicile, or is it a balance?
It's a balancing act, but some things, like if you've got a house you return to on a regular basis in that state you don't want to call home, and it happens to be the very house that you've had, and now it's still sitting there, and you go back on a regular basis, I think that'll kill your case faster than anything. But part of it is also, you got to have some empathy for the state that's saying, we think you're still actually living here, because you're probably using the resources of that state. And I'll go back to California. I went to college there. It's a gorgeous state. There's a whole lot of people who want to claim all the gorgeousness without paying the price. And so there's some reasons why the taxing folks are so emphatic about, wait a minute, if you're spending this much time here, how can you not say this is your home? And I had one policeman, a retired policeman, who called. He said, we're leaving California, and I said, California is a tough state to leave. And he said, I should know. He said, my last job there was to go around parking lots and check on out-of-state plates and follow up to see how long they'd been there, why they were there, etc. So this isn't light stuff when you get to a place that really cares. On the other hand, I think Texas loves to have you. We don't have that same, I think, we don't have people just like flooding in because it's such a gorgeous state. I love the state, but it's the kind of place where, you don't have people trying to prove you live here when you don't. We're much more welcoming of new people because it's just a whole different attitude.
Well, we do have a question that's on the screen, and thank you for that. That's pretty funny that the police officer's job was to check license plates in the crazy world. Okay, so the person's asking, don't know if this was asked. Current domicile is Washington State, want to change to South Dakota, but we left the vehicle in Washington for our daughter to drive. Should we keep Washington as our domicile?
Well, you can change it to South Dakota. Again, I'll tell you, my flags go up with South Dakota. Why are you choosing it? Are you really moving to South Dakota? Do you really say this is the place we intend to go to? You've got a daughter back in Washington. And again, whatever your health care, whatever your health insurance, Washington has Kaiser. And I know many a person will end up going, you know what, I think we'll stick to Washington once they look at everything. Because you need to look at everything, not just income tax. And you'll meet people who'll say, oh, no, you need to move to South Dakota. Why? Because of income tax. Well, maybe income tax isn't your biggest issue. Maybe you're on Medicare and your supplement's awfully good. Supplements change county to county. So if you find out, I have one woman from Harris County, Texas, which is Houston, who was going to move up to Escapees, Livingston, Texas. And I said, well, your Medicare supplement will change. Oh, no, I can't have that change. That's the best thing I've got going. So you have to look at all the details. If your daughter, all the factors you don't. Yeah, and your daughter's there, and maybe that's the place you'll go back to on a regular basis. And I'd say, no, look to stay in Washington. Don't go through all this trouble to move to South Dakota when, in fact, you'll probably not be able to prove it's your new home.
I do want to ask a question. We get a lot of questions, and we've seen them in the chat, about using a mail forwarding service. And that address, and using that address with banks, insurance companies, investment companies. What's the interplay there about using a mail forwarding service and essentially taking your business affairs? Yeah, and I did see the other question flash on the screen, and we'll get to the husbands and wives question.
Yeah, and I would say it depends on the actual financial institution or whatever. Many allow, let's say, escapees addresses just fine. My joke is every financial institution has its own set of lawyers, and every set of lawyers interprets the Patriot Act their own way. So some folks will be real insistent that no, we need to have an actual physical address where we can come get you if you're a terrorist. Now just think on that.
That's it. It's right in the Patriot Act. That's where they're getting this thought process.
And so, the idea that, okay, so if that happens, if they say, no, we need,
and they're calling themselves escapees. So, So that's where you find a relative, someone that for that purpose, you use a sticks and bricks house of a relative. And you say, for this purpose only, this is my physical address, only for this financial institution, for this account, because they say I can't use this other address. But on the whole, Escapees is pretty good about, being, folks don't generally seem to have any problem with this as an address that you can use for all purposes. Yes. Just to tether off of that, because again, I've had to do a lot of the talking to banks and financial institutions. This mentality is definitely born out of the Patriot Act. There's regulations that are derivative of Patriot Act, and usually if you say, okay, I'm going to give you the next of kin or friend's address for a limited purpose of satisfying this one requirement, but then you have made part of that file some language, just like Susie was saying, just as you were saying, you have some language in there that says, but I'm only giving it to you for this purpose. My actual domicile, my intent is this mail forwarding address. It suffices in every instance I've come across personally. There was a question about, the question is, when would having or not having domicile be an issue? And we may have covered this before, but it came up again. Can you not have a domicile?
Yeah, and you have to have a domicile.
Yeah.
There's no one who doesn't have one. So if you think, oh, I've given up my house, I guess you have a driver's license. Does it have and if you don't, do you have a identification card, passport, whatever? They have some place where you claim to have a home. So if you say, well, I don't really have a domicile, then you must not be driving, certainly not voting. What else? Maybe you are that terrorist. I'm sorry. It's just.
Well, I've long suspected you, Susie. Wait till they get my letter.
Yeah, and so you have whatever domicile you have until you change it. So if for the last 10 years you've been domiciled at this address in this town for this, and that's where you vote and that's where you do everything, then that's going to be it until you change it. So even if you don't own the house any longer, even if you never vote, even if if your driver's license is also expired, and what else is there? Is there a way to not be domiciled anywhere legally? No. That's the simple answer.
Yeah, and the courts are going to find a domicile for you whether you like it or not. If you're standing in court for some reason, somebody's coming after you for taxes, you hit somebody with your RV, it's a probate, some sort of estate plan type of deal, I promise you, the court will come to a conclusion. This is where you're from, and you get to live with that. So.
Yeah, and even vehicle insurance, that's connected to where you call home. So if you don't have any vehicle insurance, you don't have any health insurance, you don't have a driver's license, you don't vote, those are all those things they're affected by where you call home. So that domicile issue is part of really being alive in America.
We did skip over a question that was posed earlier, and it's, can a husband and wife, can spouses domicile in different states?
I think, Shawn, you should answer this question, actually.
Why is that? All right. I will answer this one. The short answer is yes. And the reason why Susie is punting to me is that I am domiciled in the great state of Texas, and my wife is domiciled in the great state of California. And so is it possible? Yes, it takes a little bit more management. Your story has to sync up and make logical sense. But, and we're all little snowflakes. Every household's a little bit different. So, so Terry, there might be something specific to your circumstances that make it so that you and your spouse are legitimately domiciled in different states. But if I can condense the takeaways from all the wisdom that Susie's been sharing with us, it's you got to tell a good story, and it's got to be true. I don't want to say story and have that be a code for lie or fraud or anything like that. You really have to have the facts that match up. I know we're getting within the next. We're getting down to the last 5 minutes, unless we go forward. I've got the $24 million question for you, Susie. This is the question that's been on everybody's mind. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
What's the best state of domicile?
I love that question. It's to me like how long is a rope? We can't answer what's the best state to domicile in for anyone. You're going to have to consider all the elements. So what I usually do is ask people to put together a spreadsheet. And in the first column, I want you to put the state you're in right now. Start there and figure out how much do you pay now in everything that's state specific. So how much do you pay if there's income tax? How much do you pay for vehicle registration? How much do you pay for health insurance, vehicle insurance? How often are you in that state? Who's there that you love, that you go to see on a regular? Do all that for the state you're in. And then you're going to get in your RV and take off. And you say, oh, let's say South Dakota is the state I'm going to become domiciled in. Okay. Ask the same questions. How much income tax will be zero? How much is registration? How much is all these things? And then how often am I going to be there at a regular basis? Who do I know there? How am I connected to that state? Do that South Dakota, Florida, Texas. Do it for any other state that you think you might want to call home. And don't, it's a process. So you don't have to leave your state on Monday and by Tuesday have a new domicile. You can take some time to figure out where can I call home legally? Where can I say this is the state I intend to call home, even though I'm living in an RV full time and traveling all over? Just it's a big decision. It takes some work, but it's the way for it to pay off is don't just jump to a state and think, oh, good, I'll be there for a week. I'll be domiciled there and I never have to set foot in that state again. Bad mistake.
Thank you. Yes. I asked that question intentionally tongue in cheek because I know that there is absolutely no perfect state of domicile, but I also know that you get asked that question on a weekly basis, and I know you could do hours and hours on the differences between,
the I keep thinking maybe you could put together a spreadsheet. Maybe you could have pull down questions. My husband's an IT kind of guy, and I keep saying, oh, why don't you figure out all the questions? But there are too many questions, which is why I like people calling and saying, hey, this is our situation, because every situation's unique. No matter how much people say, and I mean, my most fun folks are when they want us to write their wills, and they always say, well, mine's a simple will. There's no such thing. It's each person's complicated, which is what makes this fun. So, when you hit the road, before you hit the road, as you're planning your next step, or if you think, I don't think we're really domiciled where we thought we were, thanks to this great webinar we've just been a part of, then go ahead, give us a call. Let me talk you through it. And we will talk through your situation in particular and figure out the best place for you to call home.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. There's the phone number. Again, thank you for letting us pick your brain, sharing the wisdom. I know, folks, we didn't get to everybody's question, and I'm sorry, there's just a limited amount of time. But do please take Susie up on the offer for the personal consultations. They are free for Escapees members. We've posted the website address as well as the telephone number in the chat, and been a lot of fun. So thank you, Susie, and we'll see you all on down the trail.
And thank you, Shawn, and thank you, everybody. And yeah, we're in a pandemic, so we're working remotely from home. So again, boredom sets in. So you do need to call.
And of course, a special thank you to all of our attendees, and especially to Georgianne, who made this possible. In fact, the entire marketing team at Escapees had a hand in this. So thank you to them as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.